Welcome to our spiritual gathering here this morning. We have a little bit cooler weather this morning, and we hope that that translates also into some relief up north. We gather this morning on land that has been lived in traditionally for hundreds and hundreds of years. We are now here, and we are part of this community. We remember this morning as we gather all those affected by the chaos and the crisis in Fort McMurray, and we reflect that in our opening song this morning. Let hearts awaken to our deep compassion.
This candle is lit in our midst to remind us of many things, to remind us that we are together with each other, with the world, at one with the heart of the universe that begins in fire, in spark, in air, in water, in all the elements that join together to make this universe. We come together as one, not just those of us in this circle, but one with each creature, with each human, with all those around the world. And so we gather in this time and in this place to allow this light to speak to us, the light that we find within us, to speak its wisdom, to share its connection, and to bring us deeper into oneness with all that is. So whether we're old or young, whether we've been here many times or this is our first, we come here with an openness to spirit and an openness to each other and our hearts that remain present to each other. As we've made our way here this morning, let's now focus on the act of being here, to focus into ourselves, to focus into this community, and to be present to one another as we open ourselves to our time.
We read this morning from the Gospel according to Matthew in chapter 14, verses 22 through 33. These words. Jesus insisted that the disciples get in the boat and go ahead to the other side of the lake. He climbed the mountain so he could be by himself and pray. He stayed there alone long into the night. Meanwhile, the boat was far out to sea when the wind came up against them, and they were battered by the waves. Early in the morning, Jesus came toward them walking on the water. They were scared out of their wits. "A ghost," they said, crying out in terror. But Jesus was quick to comfort them. "Have courage, don't be afraid." Peter, suddenly bold, said, "Master, if it's really you, call me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come ahead." Jumping out of the boat, Peter walked on the water to Jesus. But when he looked down at the waves turning beneath his feet, he lost his nerve and started to sink. He cried, "Master, save me." Jesus didn't hesitate. He reached down and grabbed his hand. Then he said, "You're faint-hearted. What got into you?" The two of them climbed into the boat, and the wind died down, and all who saw it were amazed. This is a story passed down from the first century Jesus tradition.
Hokusai says, by Roger Kays. Hokusai says, look carefully. He says, pay attention, notice. He says, keep looking, stay curious. He says, there's no end to seeing. He says, look forward to getting old. He says, keep changing. And you get more who you really are. He says, get stuck. Accept it. Repeat yourself as long as it is interesting. He says, keep doing what you love. He says, keep praying. He says, every one of us is a child. Every one of us is ancient. Every one of us has a body. He says, every one of us is frightened. He says, every one of us has to find a way to live with fear. He says, everything is alive. Shells, buildings, people, fish, mountains, trees. Wood is alive. Water is alive. Everything has its own life. Everything lives inside us. He says, live with the world inside you. He says it doesn't matter if you draw or write books. It doesn't matter if you saw wood or catch fish. It doesn't matter if you sit at home and stare at the ants on the veranda or the shadow of the trees and grasses in your garden. It matters that you care. It matters that you feel. It matters that you notice. It matters that life lives through you. Contentment is life living through you. Joy is life living through you. Satisfaction and strength is life living through you. He says, don't be afraid. So don't be afraid. Love, feel, let life take you by the hand. Let life live through you. These are words of a contemporary scholar and poet. May we find wisdom for our living.
We've been speaking over the last few weeks about various sidetracks from the Spirit, those things that challenge us, those things that sidetrack us from the lives that we would intend, the best selves that we can be. This morning, I would like to talk a bit about our faint-heartedness. I think if there was a week to be faint-hearted, it might be this one. So I'm reminded as we start out of a clip from a movie from when I was a child. It's a moment from the 1978 movie Superman. Lois Lane is hanging from a building. Well, it's a helicopter, actually, but the helicopter's hanging from a building. And as what happens in superhero movies, you can only hang on for so long until your grip starts to go. And then this happens. There are, in fact, heroes all around us. They don't often wear capes, but people who do what they do with no wires and no safety net and no Hollywood stunts and special effects teams. And And not just those who obviously come to mind in this week, although there are those too. In a tiny shout out to mothers today on this Mother's Day, we celebrate all who have that same spirit within them. That courage and ability to give of themselves for the good of their children, for the good of their communities. And I think of a parent, maybe a single mother, maybe a struggling couple, maybe any of the countless ones we can think of, that on a daily basis they swoop up beneath their children and holding them aloft, saving them from hitting the ground too hard when they fall off one of those metaphorical skyscrapers whose edge they hadn't seen coming. We celebrate today these ones, but also the ones that we're seeing every day, maybe even every hour in the news streams and feeds coming from the edges of the wildfires in Fort McMurray. Supermen and women holding up their Lois Lanes and Jimmy Olsen's. And Lois's critical question, you've got me, who's got you? And for all those whose efforts support another, if all these people have the people in need covered, then who's covering them? And, just as an aside, when it comes to the unsung heroes of our world, the answer all too often, unfortunately, is nobody. The struggles of our veterans and our first responders and the issues we've heard about over the last years about their mental health, about PTSD, and the challenges that they have, we hope that the answer isn't that nobody has them. And yet, in our past, we know that has most often been the case. In the real world, they don't have a superhero of their own. Yet they, as with the unsung ones among us, persevere nonetheless. And that's what makes them superheroes by any measure. It's the perseverance. I just heard this morning on the news that some of these firefighters are working, they've been working for about 7 days straight, with just a few hours sleep here and there on the front of a lawn somewhere. We're both heartbroken and inspired by the work and the support that we're seeing. Not only in battling the fire, but for the displaced persons and those helping them. The story that we read today from the Jesus tradition has been called a miracle story. In fact, probably the miracle story, right? When we think of a miracle of Jesus, we think of walking on the water. Unless we're thirsty, and then we think about the turning the water into wine. But as usual, we should never read the miracle stories as if they're about the miracle, because they're not. It's not about some superhero walking on water. Just as superhero movies aren't about the otherworldly superpowers of the hero. They're always about what's going on inside the heart. And in this story, with Peter and Jesus in the boat, it's about what's going on in Peter's heart. It's about also what's going on in our hearts. So whenever we read a miracle story, we should remember it's not about the miracle, it's about what's going on in us. So here's Peter, and Peter in the stories, in the Jesus stories, we see it often. Peter is either all or nothing. In this story, Peter is all bravado. He's been hearing Jesus talk about the rising storms of life, and he saw firsthand the spiritual centeredness and calm that Jesus exhibited. He saw that and he wanted it. And so he says, with with instructions not to be afraid, he says, Jesus, call me out there. I want to do this. I can do this. And so he gets out of the boat. And what do you know? He starts doing it. He starts walking on the water. And he starts doing what he needs to do to overcome the brutal waves. But then, he looks down and he sees the churning water that's happening in this storm. And when he sees just how real his situation is, he loses his nerve. He starts to get pulled under and overwhelmed by his reality. He recognizes that he's not going to do it after all. He's sinking, he needs help, and he calls out. And, of course, he gets the help he needs. He gets the hand of his friend, Jesus, who pulls him back up into the boat, and they make it together until the wind dies down. And then, so they're safe in the boat, and Jesus turns to Peter and he says, look at you. You're faint-hearted. What happened? And that's the question for us. It looks like he's talking to Peter, but that's the question for us. When we're in the middle of life's storms, it's our hearts that need to be strong. Because the boat, well, we can't count on the boat. The wind to blow in the right direction, we can't count on that either. What we have is our heart. To be strong-hearted in the face of challenge and adversity, that much we do have. But faint-heartedness, losing our nerve, allowing our courage to drain in the moments that we need them most, that sidetrack of our spiritual health, we all know what that's like. We've all been there. We've all looked down at the waves suddenly and said, oh, shoot, I don't know if we can do this. And it can't just be a matter of will. So the question we ask ourselves is, how do we do it? I'm certain, like me, you've encountered over the last few days the question of how I can help. We are asking ourselves what we can do, how we can brave the storm that's engulfing our neighbors. And it helps me to look at Peter in the world of this story, because the first thing he does is he gets out of the boat. And that's a big deal. Because in the midst of that storm, in the midst of everything raging around him, in chaos, in nothing looking familiar as it does in a storm, the safest thing to do is stay in the boat, to stay where we know we're at least dry from the knees up. But Peter, for as much as he gets a hard time, he did the amazing thing of getting out of the boat. And that's a big deal. And we all find our own way of doing that, of getting out of the boat. For those of us with children in our lives, be they our own children or grandchildren or just children that we spend time with in our lives, we can help their anxiety by refocusing them on the helpers, as Mr. Rogers would always say. To notice how people are helping, and this isn't just for the children, by the way, it helps us too, to notice how people are helping in so many different ways, and then to do what we can to encourage them at any age to be part of that help in whatever small way they can, to be part of the strong-hearted who can do something. Because we might be scared to get out of the boat, but the fact is, even in small ways, we are dipping that toe in the chaotic, stormy water. And for our children, I notice that it's happening. In my neighborhood, a lemonade stand popped up with the proceeds going to the Red Cross. Our children, with whatever money they have, can buy a bottle of water or donate some food or help in some way. There's always some way to get out of the boat. And for us, I think our options are even greater. But we also learn something else from Peter, and that is that we surround ourselves with those that have been in the storm before. Ones with strong hands and strong hearts, to help us back up when we lose our nerve, as we all do. And in case we need a new definition of a superhero, I think the poet Roger Keyes says it just right in the poem we heard Charles read earlier. It doesn't matter what you do, it matters that you care. It matters that you feel, that you notice. It matters that life lives through you. So I suspect in a week that's been very difficult to be a neighbor and to see emotionally how the effects of something beyond our control can ravage our land and our friends. Our prayer is that we're open to the spirit of generosity, of good work and compassion, and that the ongoing task of strengthening our hearts to face what we need in life with calm, with compassion, with strength is where we need to focus. To celebrate those in our midst who step into the water with strong hearts and who can inspire us all. If nothing else, let's let a little joy and strength live through us. There are plenty of people right now in our province who need that strength. And letting it live through us is one of the ways we get out of the boat. Because that's the world we want for our children, for our grandchildren. And it helps that we do it now in crisis, but it helps us to rehearse that for every time we face one of life's storms. We'll do it each time we encounter someone in need and outstretch our hand. We may not know what to do exactly, but no one ever does. We simply need to respond with the life that lives through us, the life of strength and courage, the life of compassion. And we'll call upon our long legacy of strength, of heart, of strong-heartedness. We'll step out of the boat and we'll work to make it so in so many different ways. May peace go with us and calm and strength.
Part of what we do when we come together as a spiritual community is we gather our intentions, the intentions of our heart, and gather them into prayer. We'll share our prayer together. On this morning, on this day, in this week of high emotion, we recognize the source and strength of our community. In those who have mothered us, in those who nurture us still, we recognize the source and strength of our community. In the miracle of new life born to us, we recognize the source and strength of our community. In the pain and mystery of chaos brought home to us this week by consuming fire, we recognize the source and strength of our community. In Jesus of Nazareth, in our many teachers of wisdom, in values that we hold, we recognize the source and strength of our community. In this time, in this place, with these people, may we renew our intentions in body, mind, and spirit to live into community, to be grateful for the gifts we have received, and to share what we have with those who have lost so much. May it be so.
Friends, in great turmoil and in great storm, the strength of heart is what we have. And so as we go from this place today, may our strong hearts be a light, and may we take that light to wherever it's needed, with our families, with our friends, with total strangers. May the light of the Spirit be ever within us and connect us to all that is. May we go in the light and spirit of peace. Amen.